We finally have a conclusion on the Chidimma saga. It was announced yesterday that their citizenship has been withdrawn and that their documents, passport, ID, what all of those have been cancelled. It's quite interesting how far this has come, and I wonder if there's a part of Chidima that's like I shouldn't even have entered the whole pageant because it just opened a can of worms, and it's impacting my whole family. But at the same time, I mean, the worst has happened now. It's a matter of how do they proceed as a family going forward, her and her mom and her dad, and how do they handle the repercussions of everything that has happened? Because as much as this was uncovered, she also won Miss New Universe Nigeria, so something positive came out of it. So it's not all doom and gloom, but it's also a lesson for those foreigners who are watching this unfold. That at some point, what I love about the GNU and things that have happened now is that all of this is being uncovered. We are not opposed to foreigners coming into our country, but be documented, follow the laws of the country, so that we know who is here and we can control that process, right? If we can account for everyone that is here, that's all we want. What we don't want is people sliding, crossing rivers, coming into our country, jumping over fences, bribing their way in with not the right documentation. We are not opposed to foreigners. Our own people, South Africans, we're running into the neighboring countries in order to go into exile and to run away from apartheid and all kinds of things. So we're not opposed to that. And I think it'll be very arrogant of our South Africans to close our borders totally. What we're saying is come in, but come in legally. Be accounted for, be counted, have the right documentation relevant to your situation of why you're here. If you're working, have a work permit. If you are here on holiday, have and grant and do what needs to be done. If you need to be here for 10 days, be here for 10 days and leave. If you need to extend your 10 days, do what needs to be done, right? That's all we're asking for. But then let's see, let's hear them unpack what this means now. What does the cancellation of documents mean for them? What, can she still come back into the country? Can she still come back and live in South Africa? What does it mean for her mom, who apparently is Mozambican? What does it mean for them as a family now? How do they proceed from here? Let's hear.
To flesh out what the recent move by the Department of Home Affairs may mean for Adetshina and her mother, I'm now joined by immigration lawyer Stephanie de Saude Darbandi. Stephanie, a very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. I don't know where to begin because, I mean, already she's off to Mexico to represent Nigeria and has already declared that her blood is green and white. But nevertheless, let's talk about the implications of what Home Affairs has told us, that it's going to withdraw her and her mother's identity documents and passports.
Good afternoon, Boyo. So yes, I think one of the reasons that, I mean, we don't know that whether we heard from the minister that Chidimma and her mother was given an option and the time to respond as to why their documents shouldn't be withdrawn. And when the department says their documents being withdrawn, it obviously must mean that they're cancelling the citizenship status, and as a result, the ID and the passport will be cancelled and withdrawn. We don't know the time frame that they were given. We don't know if they've received the notice, especially considering that she's traveling. And I think, if you read the interviews with Chidimma over the past few months, I think she's been quite open saying that although she feels that she is South African, although she considers herself to be South African, she doesn't feel loved by South Africa, which I think was one of the reasons she accepted the offer to represent Nigeria and is still representing Nigeria. But it is an interesting case because, again, when you read these interviews, she says her mother was born and raised in South Africa, and her mother's family, in fact, still live in Soweto. And then we find out that the department found out that shortly before her birth, there was some alleged fraudulent activities which resulted in the mother gaining a citizenship status. So, we don't know what the status was before that. We don't know what the mother's status was up until then, considering that she was born here. Because if the mother was born in South Africa to South African family, she was born a South African, which apparently doesn't seem to be the case by the fact that they're saying she only acquired citizenship before Chidimma's birth. But if, Chidimma and her mom's citizenship status are withdrawn, then it just means that they're no longer South African citizens and no longer have the privileges they once had as South African citizens.
Yeah, it is a bit tricky. It's a bit complicated. We have to work on assumptions and presumptions. Let's just say, for the purposes of this conversation, fraud was committed on the part of maybe parents or grandparents, but she was born here, found herself here. What would the law, and forgetting a bit about the drama of how this whole thing, came about, the beauty contest and then what follows and how she feels unloved and all of that. What would be her status in a situation like this where she says, but I know nothing and I wasn't part of this. All I know is that I'm a South African, finish and clear.
Yes. Well, unfortunately, if the basis of her acquiring citizenship was her mom's status, which we understand to be the case, because the Citizenship Act, especially the act applicable at the time of her birth, said if you were born to a South African permanent resident or a South African citizen and you were born in South Africa, then you're born a South African citizen. So if the mom's status is in question and is going to be withdrawn, then anyone who acquired a status based on the mother, whether it's Chidimma or whether it's her father, will lose their status, which will mean Chidimma is not a South African citizen. Now, I'm assuming that she also has Nigerian citizenship by the fact that she's representing Nigeria. And I also assume that she would have a claim to Mozambican citizenship because of her relationship to her mother. So it doesn't necessarily mean she'll be stateless, but she won't have South African status any longer. However, there is a provision in the Citizenship Act that allows for her to have citizenship status regardless of the status of the parents or regardless of what the parents may have done. And in order to qualify for that, all she needs to prove is that she was born here, that her birth was registered in terms of the Births and Deaths Registration Act, and that she lived here until the age of 18. And I think she ticks all of those boxes. So if she wanted, she could apply for South African citizenship on that basis, but it would be a formal application that would have to be submitted to Home Affairs, considered by Home Affairs, and approved by Home Affairs.
Of course, I mean, Home Affairs has been quick to say, hey, provide us with, tell us why we shouldn't kick you out or whatever the case may be. But very little, I haven't heard anything being said. I obviously wasn't part of the conversations that happened in Parliament and since then. But I have heard or read nothing about Home Affairs itself. In other words, how was a situation like this allowed, or at the very least, how did it happen, and what could have been Home Affairs officials complicit in this? Is that irrelevant altogether when immigration lawyers sort of deal with these sorts of issues? Say someone was to deal with her case, would that have been ignored? Would that have been irrelevant or immaterial?
I think it's very important that we do know what happened. And, Home Affairs doesn't say much, doesn't disclose much, and there may be a reason for it. But I think it's very relevant and very important. And to this day, I mean, just yesterday, in fact, I was copied in an email from someone who submitted, a foreigner, European client, lawfully submitted an application for permanent residence, waiting for 5 years for the outcome to that application, bearing in mind that Home Affairs has a legal duty to process that in 8 months, but waiting for 5 years, got a call from a Home Affairs official telling her that I have your application in front of me, pay me 30,000 Rand, you can give me half now, and then I'll get the balance once you receive the permanent residence permit. People are tempted. Why? Because they spend all these years waiting, they lose out on opportunities, their lives are sometimes, it comes to a standstill, and they're desperate for outcomes. And sometimes they pay this money simply not because they want to engage in any fraudulent activities, but because they want to live a normal life, which unfortunately, as a foreigner in a foreign country, they can't do without the proper papers. So some of these people will pay that money and then suffer the repercussions years later. I mean, this is not an isolated case with Chidimma. We have many cases of this nature where people entered. Some of these cases, people knew that they were paying for their status, and they knew that they were engaging in fraudulent activities. In other cases, they honestly believed they qualified. They went into Home Affairs, they met with an official, they went there for one specific thing. This official said, you qualify for citizenship, this is all you need to do. And in some of these cases, they weren't paying a lot of money, 7,000 Rand, 5,000 Rand, which is reasonable if you're thinking you're paying for a service, bearing in mind that Home Affairs is not allowed to charge for these services. But the point is, if you're a foreigner and you don't know much and you want this help, they think that they're doing what is the right thing, providing all the necessary documents, only to find out that they're not. So the foreigner shouldn't be the only one that is penalized. And again, Home Affairs, unfortunately, is known for putting people to terms, giving them very little time to respond or to address some things when they take years to do what is legally required of them to do.
Yeah, and the reason I was asking that because, I mean, there's something that just doesn't sit well with me, because irrespective of, or notwithstanding how this case got to be discovered, and then everything that has followed, including at times xenophobic, if you ask me, comments that have been made by all sorts of people. There seems to be a wave that someone else is now riding in terms of we've asked these people to provide the department with reasons why their IDs should not be cancelled, and that has been swift, but no swiftness, on the other side to determine what what exactly happened. And in the middle of all of this, I think questions need to be asked about what or whether the people who are responsible for these sorts of things aren't sleeping on the job at least half the time.
I agree. We heard the minister say that according to his investigations, people who were involved in the mother's acquisition of citizenship have either left or died. And that may well be the case because it was such a long time ago, but it's not good enough, unfortunately, because it's still happening to this day. And it's too easy for these Home Affairs officials to get away with these things and for foreigners to be the only ones that are penalized, when really no corruption can take place without the involvement of these Home Affairs officials.
Only yesterday, in fact, we were talking about, documents and machines and things that were found where people are busy giving people, passports and documents that only Home Affairs is supposed to be dishing out. Lots to explore there, a problem that has been with us for a very long time, and it would seem with no end in sight.
That's right. It's all too common.
Stephanie, let me thank you for your time. Really appreciate it.